I want to welcome Agile XRM to the podcast. I've known the people at Agile XRM for the past 12 years. I've seen how their business process management tool can add massive value to complex organizational processes in sectors such as finance and government. If you have complex processes or a need for dialogues on the Power Platform or Dynamics 365, take a look at how this BPM tool can add value. You can find them at agilexrm.com or check out the show notes for more details. Welcome to the Power 365 show, where I interview staff at Microsoft across the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 technology stack. I hope you'll find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. In this episode, we'll be focusing on the amazing tool that is Power Virtual Agents. We might touch on things like Copilot AI and all those lovely things. My guest is from Canada. She works at Microsoft as a principal program manager. She's a writer, speaker, author, multiple books to her name. Check them out. They'll be in the show notes. She truly believes that customers and employee experience should be at the heart of business. You can find links to her bio, social media, show notes, etc. in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good. Good to have you back. I think last time we had you on the podcast was before you worked at Microsoft. You were being an MVP. Just as a bit of background, Sarah and I have spent some time together, our families, in the UK when she used to live there. But so the audience can get to know you, Sarah, tell me about life in Canada, how you ended up in Canada, and are you safe from all the bushfire reports that we're hearing going on in Canada at the moment?
I am safe, and it's a pretty terrible thing what's happening in Canada. It's actually happening all over Canada, right? There's a huge amount of wildfires, unprecedented in the scale, right? So it's definitely good to raise awareness about kind of what's happening, in Canada, because even though I'm in a good place in terms of we don't have any drastic bad things happening in Vancouver, you can see the smoke, right? You can actually see the smoke traveling so far, which for other parts of the world, that's kind of, people don't really understand that, right? And how far these kind of things can travel. But Canada's a beautiful place. It's so amazing to be able to just go out on a hike on a weekend rather than spend an immense amount of money to do so for a holiday is a true privilege. So I love it here.
How did you end up moving from the UK to Canada?
I was lucky enough to get a job offer to move, actually. So I moved for work and truly grateful for that opportunity. It's amazing, actually. And Mark, I mean, you've done it yourself, right, in terms of lived in another country. And definitely there's things you take for granted. It's definitely lots of life lessons learned when you move. So, yeah, it's been truly life-changing and amazing.
Nice. Tell me about your journey into Microsoft, because you're working for Microsoft now. How did that come about? Is it amazing? Is it you hear the term that you've landed a job at the mothership is a common term out in the community. You've become a blue badge. You lost your MVP, not because of an NDA violation, but you have joined Microsoft, and Microsoft employees cannot be MVPs. What was that journey for you?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, isn't it, right? It's almost like people see it as like kind of like a career path, like especially as an MVP, right? It's almost like, okay, so your next step is going to be Microsoft. My experience has been truly amazing. Like it has been, again, super fortunate to work where I work and in the team that I work in. You did interview my colleague Dwayne recently as well. So it's an amazing kind of experience because one of the things I truly value about working here is the collaboration. It's definitely a massive difference from where most of my career actually was, which is professional services, right? So coming from that kind of world into primary tech firm is definitely a change, one that I'm actually grateful for, right? So it's definitely really, really good. And it's quite nice where I've been able to leverage my background in Dynamics and actually kind of bring that over to the conversational side, to the conversational AI side, and everything we do in Dynamics, right? And in business applications and all of that. And that's been truly useful for the role.
Awesome. We touched on at the start there on your books that you've created, and always find it intriguing, the life of an author and just how wealthy they become from writing.
You don't do it for wealth.
You've created a tech book. Would you do it again? What's your thoughts?
Oh, that's a hard question, because like there's days I wake up and I'm like, I've got so much to say. because I love writing. It's how I learn myself.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to be honest. It depends what kind of day it would depend on what. I don't think I'd write a purely technology book anymore. Like kind of the book, it was really a guide on dynamics. It was around the time dynamics suddenly became very app focused, right? Kind of back in the day, it used to be fairly flat, right? You know, you would have your modules, you could learn the entire like kind of dynamic stack, right? And be an expert on Dynamics 365, even though it was called something different, right? Whereas it was around the time when it was really more about the depth of knowledge in each of the apps. So the book was meant to be something that you could hold in your hand and be able to at least be able to get started with it. But I don't think I would do that anymore from a tech perspective. If I was going to write another book, it would probably be something a bit more kind of human-centered or something a bit more long-lasting.
Yeah, so How to Survive an Office Romance or Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, that type of thing.
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. That was a good Charlotte song, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just think it's a labor of love really writing when it's, you know, you've got a publisher on your case. In that tech sector, the lifespan of a tech book, right, is that the technology is changing. And back when, you know, it used to be every 3 years we'd get a product update or release back in the early days of Dynamics. Fine, at least you got 3 years of runway. Yeah. Now you get, 2 wave releases a year? It changes a lot. It's hard to maintain that a book in a physical form when it changes so much.
That's the problem, right? It's funny because I remember when, back in the Dynamics days, I remember when, and you're spot on, right? You would have such a massive amount of runway. And I remember just like you would be waiting for the day that the feature that was promised would be dropping because all your customers would want it. I remember a distinct area was business process flows when they came into the Dynamics. Everyone was like, oh, wow, these are finally going to be in the product, the new kind of UI, right? We're going to do so much stuff. And, you know, it was that excitement that can be seen, you know, it's almost a bit different now in relation to that it's a continuous update cycle. It's definitely something that people need to kind of like switch their thinking around when they're thinking about like upskilling and learning.
Yeah. Interesting, those business process flows. I just think, you know, in their day, they were absolutely phenomenally amazing. And I even just had a project recently that used them, and I still think they're amazing. I think they could be extended on massively from a BPM, you know, business process management perspective and more, you know, visually enriching. But yeah, cool feature. A lot of people found it hard to get their head moving away, remember, from the old dialogues into this kind of a metaphor as a way of grabbing multiple step, you know, engagements. Anyhow, we digress. Let's talk about the amazing technology of Power Virtual Agents and why every person in the Power Platform ecosystem needs to gain experience with PVA and think about interface design in a different way. Like there's been a massive index on Power Apps, for example. Let's build an app for that. And that we're wanting a screen-based experience. And with PVA, it opens up different dimensions of engagement, which, yes, you know, you've still kind of got a micro app experience in that you can put adaptive cards and stuff, let's say in a Teams context. But it's a different way of communicating with data, extracting data in a really timely fashion. When you explain PVA to people, how do you explain it? What do you suggest they do with the tech?
Oh, wow. How long we got? Like kind of I would, I can explain it in a few different ways, but I think probably the best way to think about it, and actually, Mark, you talked about something very important, and that is that the difference between an app, right? So, you know, we're so used, and this isn't just a Power App thing, right? This is something that when you would make WinForms apps and even a website, right, is technically an app, right? You've got an interface, you use essentially a keyboard, a mouse, a screen reader, or whatever to essentially use it, right? And the very important difference when we're talking about conversational AI, and as much as that word can be super intimidating for people that are not in the industry, it shouldn't be, right? Like, definitely recommend kind of getting educated on it. You're watching this, you listen to this, so that's step one, right? It's you're using your voice to interact with it, right? So this is about not using your hands, right? This is about being able to almost like just use language to get what you're looking for. And if you think about that from an enterprise perspective, there's something just truly amazing and accessible about that is so, so very important. And that should really always stay at the heart of everything we talk about when we talk about conversational AI, because it's about enablement. Like you said, it kind of like micro app experience for sure, because most people will probably be used to like chatbots on a website, right? But the idea, and especially as you start to, everyone would have heard Satya talking about copilots, right? That this idea of this copilot experience and how AI is embedded in so many different Microsoft applications today. And it's the same thing, right? Where what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the fact that you don't have to spend a year trying to learn an app, right? Like everyone surely can empathize with this as their own consumer, right? As a consumer, you're going to have like an internet service provider. You're going to have, other service providers where they're probably going to have an app, right? Your bank will have an app. And you need to learn that interface to figure out, how can I ask for help on this app? Where do I check my balance on this app? And the whole idea is the fact that you can just say, what's my balance? And you can just say, hey, I need to raise a support ticket, right? And the truth is, like, Mark, you and I will say those things slightly differently, maybe completely differently. But the whole idea is that from a conversational AI perspective, that should not matter, right? Like, you're not hard coding slightly different differences in the fact that, Sarah said it this way and Mark said it this way. The fact is that the technology, the AI behind it knows and can understand and derive the intent from what's being asked, and then can go ahead and perform the action, right? And that's a truly fundamental difference as opposed to what should I put on this UI to make this kind of understandable for a user.
How do people get started using PVA?
Oh, wow. That's there's so many different ways. So one of the biggest and the easiest ways is our PowerCat team did a playbook. So if I think about this from the consulting element and also from a customer perspective, to be honest, this is so useful for everyone, not just implementing organizations that want to use it internally. And if you're like a Microsoft partner or something like that, the PowerCat PVA playbook will be the best way. And we'll put those in the show notes for your audience. And that actually takes you from start to finish of a PVA implementation. So, and there's actually a massive part of that playbook that covers the actual use case, like the actual business analysis. I can't, again, stress that enough. This is the make or break of any software development project. And it's when people do not spend enough time understanding what business need is being worked upon, right? And so the playbook actually talks about that quite significantly. And we actually embedded that playbook into our PVA in a day, our latest update for PVA in a day. So that's also another way that if people are a bit more hands-on, if people are like, Sarah, I don't really want to read like a 10 to 20 page PDF document, please go ahead and take a look at PVA in a day. We actually kind of really squished that down. We actually summarized that and made that really succinct. It's not dependent on each of the modules anymore either. So you can like kind of just pick up a module and kind of go. If you really are limited in time, go ahead and start with module 3, right? Go ahead and start with module 4, whichever one will get you the biggest ROI. And then the final one will probably be, there is actually a conversational UX guide that Microsoft have made, which also has like, again, we actually talk about this in a few of our materials, but again, it goes back to the human element, right? Because ultimately, you're still designing an experience for a human being, right? And so as much as we're trying to take away the kind of almost a technology interface and make this very kind of, familiar with language, there's still lots of differences that people can bring. And so the actual CUX guide is really good as well.
Yeah. The soundbite that I just took away from that is the conversational UX, which is, I had to even picture that out in my mind, and I think it's such a great way of looking at this, that it's not just a very programmatic, ask a question, get an answer. It's the nuances around answers, and it's the nuances probably more around the question, especially when people ask multi-part questions.
Yes.
And understanding that. And one that comes to mind, if I would want to validate an AI, is I'd like to book flights to Vancouver on the 20th of the month, and I want to fly first class. There I actually asked a whole range of things.
Yep.
I asked scheduling things. I asked destination things. I asked service level of product things. And that was just one question. And so many of the historic bot technology out of there needed question, answer, rather than understanding there were a multi-part question. I need to answer it as a multi-part answer. How has that changed now in the context of large language models, where it can understand that nuance of conversation? It has that kind of context to know that was what you were asking. Are you seeing a bump in experience from that?
Yeah, for sure. Like it's really interesting because the example that you kind of just provided is very similar, right, to what we actually demonstrated at Build. So we actually launched one of our latest features in PVA. It's in limited preview right now. That's kind of progressing, right? It's called Generative Actions. So that is essentially really what you just described, which is like chaining technology, right? This is around how we're using this technology to really create, again, an even more natural experience for the user, because the truth is you're spot on, right? You're not gonna, and you shouldn't have to like pass your own questions to a bot, because then again you're having to be trained to talk, and it's just the same as using an app, right? Like we have to manage these kind of natural kind of differences in ways we talk. I'm the same. I would tend to ask like 20 questions in one big paragraph on Teams, right? Like people, my colleagues probably hate me for that, but it is what it is. That kind of chaining technology is really important because they almost infer context from one thing to the next, right? So the other thing that's really important is the things that you didn't say in that statement. So you didn't actually say where you were flying from, right? There's actually missing information for the actual technology to complete the query. And so there's lots of kind of things that really need to be factored in. And one of the amazing things, and again, we'll put it into show notes, our build video, because it's actually amazing. It's kind of nearer the end, and it was booking a cruise, right? And this is where it was missing the information, the departure port. And it actually used generative AI to actually generate the question of the missing API information from a required component in the API that was needed to make the cruise booking. And it's that like kind of like, again, it takes the effort off the user. Like that is the biggest thing here that's so important, is you as the person making that query, you shouldn't have to do the heavy lifting, right? You shouldn't have to bridge the gap between technologies. You shouldn't have to kind of make do with what you have. You should actually be served, and you should be able to just, be asked that question. But then at the same time, as an enterprise, you can't hard code that information to every single request.
Yeah. Tell me about the building blocks of PVA. Because you mentioned there actions, was it? I think you said actions.
Yep.
What are the other building blocks when you're thinking about using PVA? And I wanted to go out and I wanted to gain a level of understanding around anything from large language models to generative AI to what are those building blocks in your mind? What do you need to go out, understand what it does, and then you'll have kind of like the tool set, the understanding to start creating.
Well, you coming at this from like a perspective of like a consultant or an architect, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
they're going to build a PVA solution for their business.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing I'll definitely recommend is go read those resources that we talked about a moment ago, right?
Yeah.
If you was to begin, one of the things to be mindful of in today's technology landscape from a business application perspective is there is a lot of interoperability between the technology, right? Let's just be upfront about that. Like Power Virtual Agents has a dependency for our generative AI features on Azure OpenAI service, right? And so one of the things to be very mindful of is there is this kind of element of people thinking they have to stay in their lane. And that's not really how I would recommend people thinking about it, right? You don't need to become an Azure expert, right? But you do need to know what it is. Right. You do need to understand, because ultimately, once you understand even just some of the fundamentals, you can do a better job explaining about how that service is used in Power Virtual Agents and also why. And we kind of cover this in one of the blogs that we just launched, which kind of has a little bit of a matrix as to, well, these are some of our major services from a generative AI perspective. What do you get with one of them, and, what don't you get with them, right? Like, how can you compare and contrast? Because that is one of the challenges, especially when you come at this from a consultant and architect perspective, is you're so worried about what if I lock myself out of doing something and stuff like that. You're kind of trying to future-proof something already. You've not even built the basic thing. So that's one of the things I would say to understand, is to try to just understand the kind of actual application landscape first. That's Power Virtual Agents, that's Power Automate, right? That's some of the Azure OpenAI service, right? It's literally like one docs article I'd probably recommend, which we can also put in the show notes. And then it's really about understanding what Power Virtual Agents does out of the box, right? Like, what are the fundamentals? What's the authoring canvas? What can I do? And then what are our generative AI features that the Power Virtual Agents team have worked so hard to deliver? Generative actions is limited preview, generative answers, and our Copilot feature, right? So those are our kind of like flagship kind of components when it comes to generative technology, generative AI technology. But ultimately, it's like, how can you actually create your own topic as well? Because what we're going to be seeing and what we're seeing now is where, sure, you can use generative AI technology like Generative Answers, point out on a website, but some customers are still going to want to, go ahead and actually author their own topics that they have control over and they can manage the messaging of. So understanding the fundamental authoring canvas will also be key.
Yeah. We've touched on Azure and the Azure OpenAI service. Tell me about how you'd get that lit up and working inside PVA. I'm bringing back the 90-day mentoring challenge in 2024 for people who want to take their Microsoft business applications career to the next level. So far, over 700 people have been involved in the 90-day mentoring challenge from 67 countries. And I'm constantly blown away by the stories I hear about what they have gone on to achieve and contribute to this great global community. Based on past feedback from participants, in 2024, I'll be adding more content and updating the classic modules, as well as making it more time zone friendly. If you would like to be involved, register your interest today at ako.nz365guy.com. That's ako.nz365guy.com.
Yeah, so there's almost two ways that we can look at that. There's actually like a complete hands-free way where you're never going to have to go to the Azure portal. So you can leverage Azure OpenAI service, the service directly from PVA. So again, just crystal clear, right, that you don't need to go to the portal in Azure. You don't need to go ahead and provision an Azure OpenAI service. The Generative Answers feature, for example, utilizes that service. And you can even see this when you start using, if you hook this up and if you turn this on, you're going to be able to start, pointing at a website and ask a question. Once you get an answer, you're going to see like a little bit of text that says, provided by Azure OpenAI service. And so that is one of the key things, is the fact that I've heard from a few people, it's like, to connect it, you're going to have to go do a manual connection. No, you don't have to. You can certainly go ahead and just literally use our own service. Now, the other thing you can do, which is what we just launched, is that if you're developing in the Azure OpenAI Studio, from your service, from your Azure OpenAI service, there is actually a deploy to PVA button now. So it's specifically on the Azure OpenAI on your data service, and you can just literally deploy, and that's another way you can get started.
So I don't have to worry about things like GPT 3.5 Turbo or 16K Turbo.
Nope.
Because, when we jump into Azure, you've got those options. You can go, okay, which model do I want it? It just handles that for you, right?
Yeah, so if you're going from the PVA side, yeah, absolutely right. And that's the kind of irony, is that like when people have tried to do this on the Azure OpenAI side, they're just like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's like, you probably shouldn't be in there, right? Like kind of that's, this is why we've developed these things, and the fact that we want to make it easy. We want to still provide business value. We still want to be able to make this so simple, so easy and cost effective that, you can absolutely just provision Power Virtual Agents and you're going to be able to get the generative AI features.
Wow. Pretty compelling. Tell me about the relationship between PVA and adaptive cards.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, they like each other.
Brilliant.
It's funny. Adaptive cards are was actually one of our most anticipated features when we just dropped the latest release at Build this year. So our previous version did not support adaptive cards. You would have to go ahead and install Composer and stuff like that. So you can now literally, make some very, very rich adaptive cards, as well as it's also the behavior around them. So I just want to be super clear, especially for maybe those that haven't played around with adaptive cards in Power Virtual Agents, when you add the conversational layer on top, it's not just, you have to be really kind of mindful of the channel of what that's being kind of deployed in, right? Because the actual kind of how adaptive cards are consumed by channel is quite critical because of the interactivity involved. And when you've got a conversational interface, it's important.
So you're talking about channel being, is this going out in an email? Is it going to be Teams, inside Teams?
Chat, web chat.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Okay, good. So you're saying you need to know that context of where that's going to be surfaced.
Yeah, for sure. Because like you've got to have like different kind of things available to you, right? And if you've got like a web chat with adaptive card, are you making an interactive adaptive card, or is it an informational type adaptive card, right? Because again, you've kind of switched to an app type experience where you might be expecting someone to like click something, and that's also really important when you're thinking about voice technology as well, right? So like if you've got your bot enabled for voice, things like adaptive cards are not going to be relevant in that area.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. You touched on voice. I wasn't going to go there, but let's do it. What's your familiarity personally with things like Alexa, Google Home, those type of products? Just checking my one didn't light up. And do you see, and maybe under the Copilot moniker that we're seeing, it's going to come into Windows and AI on Windows, is in preview, I think, at the moment. Do you see that the potential interface out will even move maybe further away from the keyboard as we go forward? As in, so, on my Windows device, I assume as soon as it goes public, my Windows 11 computer will update and it will have Copilot for Windows on it. And do you think in the near future we will get to that point where we will become much more tactile in voice engagement rather than using the bot from I'm still typing a question into a keyboard, and so therefore all my bad spelling, my bad grammar, my dyslexia still comes out in that, but it doesn't when I talk?
It's a really interesting question, actually. And I mean, even if you just look today, like people will use Siri 24/7, right?
Yeah.
Some people won't use Siri like at all,
Correct.
right? They'll just turn it completely off. And it's kind of a similar experience. You get some people that love Alexa being in their home, other people don't like it. And I am a big fan, and I talk about this fairly a lot on various platforms about like I do truly believe in the ubiquitous nature of conversational AI technology. Because I think that, I mean, even if you just watch like, films, right? Like, you don't see someone really using a chatbot, right? You see someone using their voice. You see like the actor or the main person using their voice and asking the computer what to do, right? And so I think how much the world has now become aware of conversational AI technology from like ChatGPT, right? I think that's just going to continue. The people being more comfortable with kind of, talking to things. Because the other thing to be mindful of that is like, it's not particularly great on like customer calls, or like you have to kind of take into consideration like noisy environments,
Ambience,
right? There's new things to consider when you change kind of the interaction model of the technology.
Yeah. Babies. That definitely affects things. The noise
yeah, for sure. If you've got a screaming child or something,
I'll be halfway through a prompt and then my daughter will talk to me, and of course it's now picked up on that part of the conversation as trying to respond. And I just want to turn the lights off or turn the lights on or something like that, Not set a new timer or play,
Because then you're backtracking, right? You're just like, no, don't do that. Don't do whatever you're going to do.
Honestly, as in, so my almost 3-year-old, she is pretty close to saying all the commands.
Really?
And I'm pretty sure that once she every now and again, she'll definitely get Google to respond, because we're mainly a Google Home house, although I do play in all ecosystems. So I've got a couple of Alexa devices as well. But yeah, at really realizing, oh my gosh, I can actually control the projector turning on, and I can get Paw Patrol by saying something rather than knowing how to control buttons and stuff. So it's only a matter of time. And even her bedroom lights, right? It won't be long till she works out, do you know what? She doesn't need to reach the light switch. She can actually just
and
say.
And it's natural for her though, right, as well, which is like the truly magical thing, right? She's growing up with this technology. Like, can you imagine, like, kind of when she's older, like putting like an old interface or an app in front of her? Like, she's probably going to be like, what are you, like, Dad, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, I'm gonna get a little Morse code key and teach her how it all started. Like, blip, 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 blip. Let's just change directions. We've talked about PVA for a bit and we're almost on time. Tell me about side projects that you are into. I see you often post under your favorite feline around careers and things like that. Tell me what's tickling your interest outside of PVA.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I like making cat quilts. That's something that I do now. I kind of, I've gone down that route of making actual quilts.
You kill cats, you get
no,
the skin,
don't
and
say
you turn
that.
them into...
Don't say stuff like that.
You said a cat quilt.
No,
I was like, I assume
for
that
my cat.
you're using cat fur to make...
No, never.
Okay, quilts
for
those
those
cat.
For those listening, I'm giving Mark so many evils right now. No,
no,
they
evils.
they are super happy. I've got good customer feedback from my cat quilts, so that's something that sometimes it's nice to just get away from the laptop, and actually do stuff like this with your garden, right? But from a career perspective, like I am super passionate about like digital literacy, right? Like it's and also just career planning, right? Like it's something that we just do not talk about. And I don't know why. It's one of those things that I'm just like, I have no idea why people just are so afraid to talk about their career with whether their manager, their peers. I've got lots of theories of why, right? But like, I'm hoping by talking about it, and like I've got the Substack on it. I've just started like Motivation Mondays to try to give people a little bit of like healthy dose of optimism on a Monday morning, right? To hopefully normalize the fact that people should be having career conversations and being open and giving them the tools to do so.
I like it. For all of those in the Southern Hemisphere, she means Tuesday morning. She just
yeah.
Okay, and so I love the stuff you're doing around resumes, CVs and stuff. I just was on a podcast recently, Ecosystem Podcast, which will sometime be published on the show, and I am shocked with the number of CVs that come across my desk, as I am one of the people that decide on people's employment inside my organization at the lack of substance, the lack of personal development, the lack of direction. I'm shocked that most people's CVs represent, they were asked on their last project to do something, so they learned about that something and did it. It was not, so in other words, anything that's on their CV is because somebody else, you were doing somebody to meet somebody else's agenda, not your own agenda, not your life goals, not where you're wanting to go, not this, and it concerns me. And I used an example, I don't want if I had brain surgery, I don't want my surgeon to have looked up on YouTube 20 minutes ago how to do it, right? Yet, in our industry, where we're touching phenomenal amounts of data and implications of that, I feel there are so many consultants that are literally 3 YouTubes ahead of the customer videos, right? And that's concerning because it's not a holistic view, right? It's a very much one person's lens in that YouTube. And I think YouTube's a great micro-learning type platform and experience. But if your career is in the space, act like it. Like, learn it all. I love that, from Satya. Be learn-it-all people. Like, be the best in your category, not just the best at the last item on the project you did.
And what a time to do it, right, Mark? Like, kind of, we have such an abundance, going back to what we were just chatting about, right? The interoperability between this platform is amazing. Do you have an interest in AI? Go take a look at AI, right? The amount of materials is just phenomenal. Sometimes overwhelming, for sure, but overwhelm is better than nothing. And you can get the tools to navigate overwhelm, right? You've got a place to begin rather than it being kind of like, behind lock and key. So it makes me sad. I'll be honest with you. It makes me sad when I see a poor CV because I almost feel like one of two things have happened. Because that person could actually have passion, right? They could actually have passion. They could actually have experience, and they've done a poorer job of showing you, the person who can potentially give them employment, of that passion, right? Or, there's the second thing, which is what you said, which is they've let someone else really give them the route to where they're at today. Like, as in they've been directed to, oh, you're on this project, go learn it. You're on this project, go learn it. And you find this kind of haphazard piece. And it is truly heartbreaking as an interviewer when you ask, oh, why did you do that? And it'll be like, oh, because it was on my project. And it's like, so you're not actually passionate about it. I mean, the challenge there is that the resource inside of the house can be, especially in consulting and professional services, it does direct where employment is a lot of the time and projects for sure. But I think people almost see that as the fact that, oh, I don't have autonomy. I don't have conscious choice to go, I'm on this project, but I actually have a passion in data, so I'm going to go learn this side of things. And that actually opens up so many doors. I feel like for those listening, if you have a passion like that, you might not think it'll open doors, but it actually does, because you'll just get chatting to a random person one day about that topic, or an interviewer, and they'll be like, wow, this person has taken the initiative to go do something on their own, and that's worth a lot.
Yeah. Totally agree. Final question I like to ask my guests more and more these days. How are you personally using AI? So forget about Microsoft, the tech, all that type of stuff. How do you use it in your life?
Yeah, so I use it a lot on LinkedIn. So, because like I don't want to be putting my own hashtags into my LinkedIn post, like I've got better things to do. That's something that I think is super, super good. The other thing that I've noticed is that AI is being embedded in existing apps today. So like you would be using like, note-taking apps or whatever, Microsoft aside, right? Just any other application, right? There's AI being used. You'll see like a little kind of AI logo or whatever it is, right? And you'll be like, oh, wow, you've embedded that. Like I've been learning French. So Duolingo is a really good app to do that. And they embedded AI in the app, right? I mean, it's a different SKU, like that you have to pay more money for stuff like that sometimes, but totally. I think that that's kind of cool. So I almost feel like it's almost not a conscious decision mark anymore either. Is it like some people may not even realize they're using AI in some of these applications because existing applications have been updated to use it.
Yeah, agreed. Sarah, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. It's amazing.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 guy. If there's a guest you'd like to see on the show from Microsoft, please message me on LinkedIn. If you want to be a supporter of the show, please check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 guy. How will you create on the Power Platform today? Ciao.